Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome Sanjay Pradhan, who will introduce our main speaker.
Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Wonderful? Great. So clearly, as we are winding down and closing out the IACC, we have saved the best for the last, isn't it? So I'm truly privileged and honored to host a conversation with Gurudev Sri Ravi Shankar on values and ethics to combat corruption. You know, our traditional approach right here at IACC, if we look over the years, our traditional approach to fighting corruption has focused on external accountability. It has focused on transparency and public oversight to sanction, constrain, investigate corruption. This is really important. This is really important. But it also assumes that if we only focus on external accountability, it also assumes that everyone will necessarily be corrupt, and we simply need to constrain them, sanction them, investigate them. That is obviously not the case. Right here at IACC, everyone watching online and beyond, we know that there are so many reformers, so many public servants, so many other stakeholders who are not motivated by the threat of external accountability, but rather they are powered by their intrinsic commitment to values and ethics, which we must nurture. Delia Rubio, in the opening plenary, emphasized this very strongly. In the opening plenary, right here on Tuesday, I recounted the story of my father in Bihar, in India, where he insisted on awarding road contracts through open tender, even though he was viciously attacked and threatened by powerful forces. He was not motivated by external accountability, but out of his intrinsic commitment to values and ethics. So the question for us in the anti-corruption movement is, how do we continue the external accountability, but how do we simultaneously nurture a commitment and build a commitment to values and ethics, to integrity and service, particularly at a time when we feel that we are surrounded in a sea of corruption, in a culture of corruption? How do we reverse this culture of corruption? I can think of no better person than Gurudev Sri Ravi Shankar to address this topic of values and ethics. Gurudev is a global humanitarian, a spiritual leader, and an ambassador of peace. And there is a lot I can say about him, but let me just share one piece of information that you may or may not know. 19 years ago, at IACC in Seoul, South Korea, Gurudev was invited to be the keynote speaker on values and ethics to combat corruption. That took place 2 decades ago. This is an incredible opportunity for us to hear from him on the messages, how he would give the message today for fighting corruption and advancing values and ethics, also informed by extensive experience, initiatives, and various programs that he has been pursuing to advance values and ethics. You see, over the last 40 years, Gurudev has been teaching breath-based meditation, mindfulness programs, which have impacted, get this, an estimated 800 million people in over 180 countries. That scale is mind-boggling. But what is even more amazing is when you combine that breadth of impact with depth of impact. Let me repeat that. When you combine that scale and breadth of impact with depth of impact, millions of people who have experienced these programs on breathing techniques and mindful meditation have reported a sort of actual improvement in stress, peace, calmness, and an inner resilience in fighting adversity. And when individuals are transformed, they become agents of social change. And I have seen the impact of this through Gurudev's leadership programs that we implemented in the World Bank for 8 years when I was vice president of the World Bank Institute, and over the last 2 years as CEO of the Open Government Partnership. And what we have found is that through these mindfulness techniques and breathing exercises, we had cohorts of ministers, senior bureaucrats, civil servants, and what we found is through these programs on breathing exercises and mindfulness techniques, it produces a center of calm. And when there is a center of calm, you ask, what can I do for you? When you are anxious, you are looking to see, you're looking to acquire. When you have a center of calm, you're looking to serve. So it shifts the mindset from to giving rather than taking, which is the big issue of corruption, isn't it? It is wanting to be served rather than to serve. And through these techniques, there is a shift in the mindset, which is what I have seen practically through these programs. So with this backdrop, I want to invite very warmly Gurudev Sri Ravi Shankar to the stage to share his thoughts. Is this working? Gurudev, very warm welcome, Gurudev. Gurudev, I have one opening question for you. Almost 2 decades ago, you gave a very famous speech in the same platform in South Korea, which was entitled 5 C's to Combat Corruption: cosmology, connectedness, commitment to contribute. One question is, what is your message today, 2 decades later? And another piece of this is, through the last 2 decades, your programs have reached vast numbers of individuals and leaders. Based on how they have been impacted, how do you see we should build an approach which builds this commitment to integrity?
I think, Sanjay, you have already said. You have said all that I had to say. Now, see, values don't change for generations or even in time. That's why they are values. Methodologies may change. The implementation may change. But the basic, the core values remains because they are timeless. Like compassion, sense of belongingness, it's timeless. It can't be different 10 years later or 10 years before. But situations call for adaptation of the values in different modes. The mode of operandi may change, but essentially the basic values remains the same. They always say that corruption begins where sense of belongingness ends. I want to give you an example. Recently a gentleman who is an Art of Living follower, he had to go to a government office for some documents. He had to get a document. So he went, and then the officer asked him for some money under the table. And in the conversation, he said he belongs to a certain village. And suddenly the officer, his eyes lit up. Oh, see, I also come from the same village. Then he asked him, no, don't worry, you don't have to give me anything. Here is your, come on, take the document, certificate you want. How did this happen? Because this person had that identity. I belong to a certain village, and someone from my own village, someone who is my neighbor or neighbor to neighbor, has come. So there is that human connectivity that arose in a person. then corruption drops. No, he says, no, I don't. See, no one does any corrupt practice with people whom they feel they are close to them. And today in society, if we live in an isolated groups and isolate ourselves in small little shells, live in a closed shells, then what can you expect? Anxiety, fear, insecurity. And how do you combat insecurity? By money. We think, at least we think, money is one way to get over your insecurities. And the way to do that is corruption. Because there is no end to greed, you see. And the mother of greed is insecurity and lack of sense of love.
So Gurudev, just picking up on that, so if insecurity and lack of connectedness are two roots of this problem, how practically do we foster that, more security and more connectedness?
This is what we have to think. There could be a million ways to do that. It's all up here. See, post-COVID, the anxiety level in the world has tripled. Anxiety tripled means insecurity has multiplied several times more in people. And so you need to teach them how to handle their mental resilience or mental health. Help them to go inward, get rid of stress, and connect to people in real time, not just on social media. I'm very happy to see the younger generation, the G generation today. They are not so much consumeristic in their nature. They are more for social cause. They are ready to jump in for something that's of value to them and to the society. And this is a very good, it's a welcome change that the world is seeing today. It's not like the previous generations where they were self-centered. The younger generation is more social-centered, I would say.
Very nice. That reference to the younger generation, Gurudev, is a great segue for what we wanted to do now, which is that the younger generation, as you're saying, are more less self-centered, more social-centered. They're also impacted a lot by the culture of corruption, but they can be agents of change. So we would like to invite on stage a youth panel, sort of moderated and led by Juliana Cano Niete. Can you come up on stage? Juliana is the head of communications, TI Secretariat. And along with Juliana, I want to invite the panelists, the youth panel, Kelsey, Christopher, and Sena. Come on up. And who else? Go ahead.
And may we also invite Valerie and Catherine.
Come, just come. Wonderful. Wow, welcome. Do we have enough seats? Yes.
Yeah, we do. It's all arranged. Well, welcome everyone, and welcome everyone for joining us in this panel. I'd like to introduce the young people that are part of this panel today. I'll start with Valerie Ramaharison. He works as Extractive Project Officer at Transparency International Madagascar. We also have Steer, our meditation teacher and government contractor. And on the other side, we have Kelsey Lindy, who is Assistant Director for the Sky Campus Happiness, Sena Sarakaya, who is an Internal Affairs Master's candidate at George Washington University, International Affairs, sorry. And Catherine Cloutier, who's a Canadian lawyer working with Transparency International. So please welcome them all. And what we will be doing today is we want them to be able to ask Gurudev questions in relation to our topic, which is values and the fight against corruption. So I'll first give Valerie, if you would want to go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, thank you for giving me the floor. I'm going to jump right away to questions. In different countries, we have different cultures, and cultures are transmitted from generation to generation. Like in our country, we value the elders, but the elders might not have the value of transmitting the to fight against corruption. In the contrary, we introduce corruption in your daily conversation. So, as we younger people in our country, we are influenced by that. So how can we, as younger people, can get the values, or how can the young be taught the values of integrity and the values of fighting against corruption if the ones that should be responsible to transmit those values do not have those values in mind?
Yeah. See, there are two aspects. One is respecting the elders and the culture for what they have come. No, it is not by choice that they have accepted corruption. It is through inevitability that they have accepted corruption, if it is in a culture like that. So here we need not take on the weakness of a culture and nurture it. Rather, we have to only select the strength of the culture. At the same time, what our elders could not achieve due to inevitability, due to lack of proper good governance or lack of rules, whatever it is, those things we must supplement it or complement from our side by standing up against corruption. Nobody, no elder would ever object an anti-corruption movement. They would not. If they are objecting, it's only out of fear and inability to combat corruption. See, the fight against corruption cannot happen by a lone person. It needs a collective resolve. And when that collective resolve was lacking with the elders in some way in the past, or they didn't have the strength to combat it, we need not follow the same weakness. We have to change that by strengthening ourselves and making the elders happy. Yeah.
Thank you, Valerie. And that's very true. I do believe that we need a collective resolve to corruption. And it would be great to hear from you, Steer, what question kind of comes to your mind when we're talking about this, talking about collective resolve and all of us fighting corruption, especially from the young generation.
Sure. Thank you, and hi, Guruji. My question is in regards to, for young people, what type of mindset, speaking on what you just spoke of, but what type of mindset can young people take on that can tackle this situation without necessarily becoming aggressive? You see protests all over the world, and sometimes there's violence that comes about, but how can young people channel that type of energy to have a more peaceful approach?
Yeah. Activism is absolute necessity to bring a change. But activism need not be associated with aggression. We must make the difference between activism and aggression. Aggression leads to violence. Activism is an expression of resolute stance on values. So, honoring non-violence is part of activism, will fetch us result, though it may take more time, but for sure a result that will be cherished by people. Like what Mahatma Gandhi did, it's a bloodless revolution. So all revolution need not be bloody. Many revolutions can happen with a happy face to it. One such, I would say, is the Green Revolution, Industrial Revolution, Scientific Revolution. Like that, a revolution of values can also take place with the resolute youth force, with full of activism, minus aggression and, waywardness.
Thank you. And I'm sure that Kelsey would love to follow up on that with another question, so I'll give it to you, Kelsey.
Is it on? Yes. Hi, Gurudev. When we see corruption all over in political sectors, political leadership, government bureaucracies, and in private sectors, how do we as a whole and young people build a more ethical culture of service and leadership?
I would say you must keep this question. You may get a million answers. In that, a few thousand may be practical. And if you can implement even 10 out of those ideas, you'll be successful. But to give a wider outlook towards this, or guidelines to this, I would say, first sow the seed of values, Why no corruption? Why we say no corruption? Because you don't want something that others do to you, and you don't want to do it to others. See, a corrupt practice is not something that one cherishes or likes. In the heart of heart, nobody wants to be corrupted. So they just feel helpless because of the circumstances, situation, or in a collective situation. Here we need to arise the collective consciousness, wake them up, say, look, this is something that you can stand up against. Not alone, but as a community. And it is doable. Wherever it is, wherever you find such corrupt practices, I think communication, number one. Second, understanding, going into the depth of it. See, you can say on the surface, oh, it's corrupt. But if you go to the depth of it, you will see there are many layers that you need to cross over. So a thorough understanding of a situation and see how possible it is to change it, to what degree and where, this requires good thinking. And this cannot happen over an emotional outburst, but a calm and steady analysis is needed to take action in any of these situations.
Yeah, so definitely corruption is a long-standing problem and one that it's going to take many years to be able to address. And like you said, we need to be calm and steady and resilient to be able to approach it. So it would be great to see, Seina, your question, if it evolves around, kind of how to move forward in order to achieve that.
Hi, Gurudev. Thank you for meeting with us today. I wanted to ask you, what should be the role of young people in fighting corruption, and what can young people do to concretely help reverse the tide?
Yeah, young people should own the world, right? The world belongs to you. And before the current generation completely destroys it, you should see that, hey, that I own that. You better pass it on to me in a better fashion. So you start owning the planet and, create the awareness in the group. Alone, you cannot achieve much. But as a collective force, there is nothing that you cannot achieve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Seina. And it is, in these few days that we've been talking here during the conference, we have very much talked about collective action as a way to be able to continue the fight against corruption. So I'd like to hand to Catherine, who is also part of this movement, to ask Gurudev your question.
Thank you for the question, Juliana, and thank you, Gurudev, for having me here today. And I have to thank you for mentioning in your opening remarks this sense of belonging. So my question is going to revolve around the sense of belonging and a distortion of democratic values. So in Canada, we have a long history of strong democratic institutions. However, in the past few years, I've seen this rise of hate, extremism, and a clear lack of awareness of our own privilege. And it's really been fueled by extreme political leaders, social media, that has been giving this distortion a kind of sense of belonging. So my question is, where do we go from here? How do I show my fellow Canadians, that this understanding is incorrect, right? That we have distorted our idea of what is democratic values.
Yes, this is a big challenge that we are facing in this decade. At least last couple of years, I would say. But fortunately, the population has woken up for fake news already. In the beginning, if you remember, when in the very beginning of social media phenomenon, people just believed that everything that is coming in social media is true, without even having to check the facts. The fact checking was not there at all in the first couple of years. But today, we have woken up. We say any news we just don't believe in it. We go to check the facts. And there are websites for fact checking even, and checking the background of person who is spreading such news. So this is to our advantage. Of course, not many people are aware of such things. They still get carried away by the fake news, which would definitely hide their emotions. And that's where we need to be more careful when it comes to triggering the emotions of people and making them an activist without really knowing the facts, whether it's correct, true or not. In any conflict, when you speak to either side of the conflict or multiple sides of the conflict, what you will come across is they are correct in their own way, in their own thinking. If you talk to them, they'll convince you what they believe, what they know is right, and it's a fight for righteousness. It is here you need people who do not belong to any group to do really a fact check and build the bridges, make them understand, and give them this understanding. Their understanding is wrong. That's not correct. So to make that happen, you need to have that people in between, neutral, people who are not party to any conflict, any sides, to build the bridges. Because they have the trust of both the sides. And this is needed today. Media used to play that role of being an impartial reporters. Unfortunately, media has lost that today. They have in fact become just a vehicle of one or other side to carry their news and amplify the falsehood. To great extent, I won't say every media, most, but many of them are very clear in their stance. So they are no longer a neutral platform for people to get the information. So in this stage, I think movements like this anti-corruption movement and many other social reform movements can play a big role in bridging the gap and bringing the facts on the table.
Thank you so much. And I want to see if there's anyone else that would like to ask a following question. Yeah, I think Steer, you're looking like you want to.
Yes, Guruji, has corruption always been a part of human society? And, if so, then how can we feel that there's a true hopelessness to level it out?
Well, this is a very tricky question. If we say, yes, corruption has always been a part of human society, then we somehow, subconsciously, we accept it. Well, it has been always part of the human society. It will continue to exist. And what is that we can do? You lose the power to change it. And to deny, it was never part of the history or all the time, you need a lot of work, research work. And no anthropologist so far has gone so far into the history of mankind to find out whether there was corruption or not. So you can't say yes, you can't say no. Authentically, I tell you. But it is futile to say, to even infer they have had corruption. So what if they have had or not had? It is no good for us to have it now. That's where we must know.
Kelsey, I think you had another question as well, right?
Well, you brought up so beautifully about the news media and how, it's telling us all these stories, it's telling us what to believe, it's instilling fear in a way and being driven off that. So how do we take in news from various sources and utilize that to even allow young people to take action and to be advocates? What do they take from that? Or how do they take from that?
Yeah, no. Having said that, I don't mean that you should not believe any news that comes across. That is again sort of impossible for us to do. When they show visuals, when it is authentic, you have to take it. You have to take the news. So it's a middle path that we need to train here, that yes, we need to get the information, at the same time do our fact checking. Fortunately, we have today in society such facilities. And third thing is, in spite of having all the information, you should listen to your own gut feeling. You should, independent of the information that you get, you must act with your intuitive ability. What is that you want to do? It could be revolutionary. It could be completely something that is out of the box. And that ability we must use. Because every leader has always been using is gut feeling. If not always, at least sometimes are used when he has found success. So that's something that we must utilize. For that, we all need to meditate. That is important. Every leader, every agent of social change must come from that space of serenity, centeredness, calmness, and a sense of commitment. These things can come only through meditation.
And we do want to have some time for people in the room to ask questions. So I'll say if there's a couple more questions up here. Yep.
Hi, I also just wanted to ask, what can citizens do if they're living in a country where the government itself is the one that's corrupt? And I don't specifically mean the US just because we're in Washington, D.C. I mean globally in countries where people are stuck in corrupt regimes. What can they do as citizens to combat that when voting is just not enough?
First of all, they have to create awareness of such situation. And then they had to form groups of well-meaning citizens and to help convince the system to change from being, to continue in the corrupt practice to something straightforward, honest, and socially uplifting projects. That is something one must do. And social media, of course, be active on social media to create such awareness.
Thank you so much, Valerie. You're good? Yeah? Great. So we'll open it up for people in the room. There's a few microphones on the side. If you have, I think we have a couple of space for a couple of questions.
Hi, Gurudev. You've brought up some really interesting points today. Thank you so much for sharing all of this here. So my first question is, the World Cup in Qatar has brought to light the kafala system, right? We are seeing inhumane exploitation of human labor and insane amounts of corruption and denial of basic human rights that we have now become aware of. So much corruption and exploitation that has taken place because of the World Cup, right? So my question here is, what is the very first step that we can take to get rid of this kafala system and bring justice to people who have been affected because of this situation?
First thing is to make people realize how the system is inhumane. That's it. That's the first and final step. If you know it is inhumane and nobody wants an inhuman act on them or to them, when you can't tolerate such a system towards yourself, you can't impose it on someone else. So make people stand in the shoe of the person whom they are submitting to such a system. And that will do the job. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Anne. I'm from Uganda.
Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead, Anne.
Yes, thank you very much. Mine is first a remark, and then I will ask the question. First of all, I want to thank you very much, the panelists. You have been great, a great panel, and the conversation, I hope, will continue after this. Also, to acknowledge that this is a very important session for me, in my view, because when all is said and done, the solution to the fight against corruption lies in the ethical values that we build for the societies that we live in. I have always asked myself, how do you legislate? How do we legislate over a moral issue? Studies have shown that the main cause of corruption is not need, but greed. So how do you legislate over greed? So when you talk about ethical values being key in the fight against corruption, I think that is the right way for every society, every progressive society should adopt or should go. Now my question is, the young people learn by seeing. They learn, it's not that they learn by what they are told, but what they see. In a world where we are grappling with values, what would you advise?
I got your question, In fact, I have already answered this in the very beginning. If you had noticed, the cause for greed is insecurity. And the cause of insecurity is lack of self-awareness, lack of understanding that they are being loved, and there is enough care in the planet for each other. So, again, there's an inward journey that is needed for a person to find the strength to combat both greed and insecurity. Yeah? Only then the true character of a good human being can shine through. Yes.
Let's go here to the middle. If you could say your name.
Yes, my name is Preeti. Hello, Guruji. My question is around neutrality that you had mentioned. How do we maintain that neutrality and not get into this blame game when we are instituting change? How do you maintain that neutrality? It's a very slippery slope to find a blame and point a finger. Thank you.
Yeah. See, the moment you realize you are on a blame game, your blame has already weakened. It's no longer a fact. When you think you are only saying what is factual, you don't call it blame game. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When you realize that what you thought as a fact is no longer a fact, there is another side to it, then you come to the conclusion it's a blame game.
I see.
So, we are one step already out from the rigidity of a concept that that's how things are to an imaginary platform. And imaginary platforms don't last too long. They'll wane away. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a question on the left. We'll go there next.
Yes.
My name is Andrew, and I think that addressing corruption against well-respected, upstanding people in society is one matter, but I think that there are certain segments of society that are often targets for corruption because they are unpopular or vulnerable. You know, perhaps incarcerated people, people with mental health conditions, drug addicts, prostitutes, etc., that we may see targeted for corruption, but it's harder to defend these people. And people might acknowledge that certain segments are treated corruptly, but there is indifference because people don't like these people anyways. How would you address sort of this manifestation of corruption and how to fix it?
Yeah, these are the disease that is clogging our system, our whole society as such, whether drug addiction, prostitution, crime, different types of crime that our society is facing today is appalling. It's really painful. Any sensitive human being cannot sit quiet. Their heart cries to do something about it. Now here, how does corruption gets linked to this? Is a different question, you know. Whether it is a corrupt practice or it is an acceptable practice or it is a practice which people take pride in. You know, there are many inner city gang members who take pride in how big their crime was. If you ever happen to visit the hardcore prisoners, the convicted prison cells, the one who has done the maximum crime is the hero to the one who has done a lesser crime, grade of crime. So that type of taking pride in the crime in society or even corrupt practice in society, I would say is the distortion of human psyche. It needs treatment. That needs the treatment. You know, that psychologically something has gone wrong. And I would attribute all this to the lack of robust mental health of our society. We need to address the mental health, number one, and not just of the population, but of the leaders as well. A few leaders who are not sane enough to be sensitive to the needs of people, who cannot see everyone equally, as something wrong in their psyche. So this needs to be addressed, but if you ask me how do you do it today, I have no answer. I think we all have to collectively see how and what all methodology we can adopt to change this system, and with the hope it is possible to change. If we think it's not possible, then that's it. We can't even keep one step in that direction. First, let us say that it is possible to change this system. When you look back in the history, many people have done it, have changed, made the impossible possible. So we do have power to make the impossible possible. Collectively, if we can put our mind, I think we'll be able to achieve a breakthrough in these situations.
Thank you.
We'll go down here to the middle. We don't have a lot of time, so we'll take a few more questions and then we'll have to wrap up.
Thank you very much. My name is Anil Chaudhary. I'm from Bangladesh. So Gurudev, thank you very much for the very inspirational dialogue and also the inspiration that you generated today. You talked about how public sector and private sector leaders must go through introspection and meditate. Now, what I have seen in many countries, maybe in all countries, that leaders often overlook or even endorse corruption in the name of socioeconomic growth. Perhaps they even believe that a sense of, or at least some measure of corruption is necessary for socioeconomic growth. Now, how do you reconcile this belief? How do you actually, what kind of meditation would actually change this perspective and move the needle towards more ethical practices? Thank you.
You should ask them to talk to me. I can tell them it is possible to do without, feeling that corruption is necessary for a change. The gentleman who was standing there, he wanted to ask, please come. Was standing here, you wanted to ask a question, you would like to take a seat.
Thank you, Gurudev.
Now is your turn, yeah. Please.
Thank you. You answered some of it, but it had to do with hope. My name is Kelly. I'm a clinical psychologist, and also I practice Christian spirituality. And like yourself, I'm a little older than most people here, and we have seen so many sincere efforts in different generations, different social movements for change, for macro change, whether it's the age of Aquarius or this or that. And my question for you is, I understand hope is important, and if we believe in hope and not give up, we can make change. But I'm wondering about the macro view, a major shift in consciousness, a major shift in the course of reality and humanity versus like a change in this community or a change in this society. Any thoughts on the big picture and anything underlying reality that might be helping us and supporting our efforts? Thank you.
Yeah. I think this has already begun. The macro change has already begun. "41 years ago, when I would talk on environmental changes and climate change, people would raise their eyebrow, what is he talking about? You know? They thought it's a very naive thing to talk about planting more trees and care for environment. So we have to be on the fast track of growth. And today I'm so glad to see that every country on this planet, most of the countries, have an environmental ministry, and every industry that has to be, that has to function, have to follow certain rules on the environmental, laws. So this is a welcome change that has happened. There is more concern for environment today than we had 42 years ago. Similarly, there is more awareness about corruption, and there are anti-corruption bureaus in many countries. We cannot discredit all of them. Of course, some of them are not functioning as they should be functioning. But at least there is some movement in that direction. So I'm very hopeful that a macro change can happen, because the micro change has already started sprouting, number one. Second, the collective consciousness has definite impact on society. And that is where the movement which comes up with a collective resolute ideas should also adapt calmness, peace, and meditation as part of it, which would add more impotence to the movement and positivity to the movement. What you always find is, it's easy to gather people on a negative call. And people with negative mindset are super active. But those with a positive mindset have a little bit laid back attitudes. They will do it manana, tomorrow. That type of little bit laid back attitude, that needs to shift. If this little shift happens in society, one example is Brexit. Another example was the peace process in Colombia, where only a small percentage of people voted against the peace process in the referendum. Of course, it's a good thing that it was not considered and we went ahead with the peace process in Colombia. So what I'm saying is, people with positive mindset should come forward, move forward with great force and impotence. And this can happen if they invoke the inner power that they possess. Yeah? One last question.
One last question. We're going to be very democratic. We'll allow the two people standing to decide who wants to go.
Okay, we can take two because it's only two.
Thank you, Gurudev. I think you solved the problem. So let's start on the left.
Thank you. Thank you for taking that pressure off. My name is Alana. My question is, in this community we speak a lot about accountability, including accountability for those who have taken corrupt actions that may have had negative consequences for others. I was wondering if you could speak to the role of compassion as we think about how to carry out accountability in our societies.
Could you please repeat the question?
Yes. So it's a question about how to bring compassion into accountability, and I'm thinking specifically about the way that we're writing laws and creating regulations that have kind of material consequences for those who carry out corrupt actions.
How to bring about compassion? The first step is reduction of stress. If someone is stressed, agitated, angry, or feeling anxiety, forget about compassion. You can't expect any of these noble characters or what we call the human values per se will exhibit from them. Not possible. You can't expect any of these expressions in them. If you expect compassion, commitment, and better communication, even communication, you need to first see that they are free from stress, anxiety, and tension. This is, I would say, this is the mental hygiene. If mental hygiene is not there, you can't expect any of these, activism from them.
And one last question here in the middle.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Chris. I wanted to ask, what would you recommend to us? How do we work on our personal integrity? We also rise to positions of power, and there can also be a temptation of abusing it. Is there some ideas that you have, some exercises that you can share with us?
I'm glad you recognize you all have power. This is first thing we should do. We have the power to change, number one. Second, you already have a platform here. You are not alone. You have a backing, you have a system. The second advantage, this will empower you doubly. And then think about it. Strategy is necessary, but at the same time, skill is even more necessary. Power alone cannot bring change. Power plus skill can bring the required change that you need to do. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the participants of this panel. We appreciate you coming up here and asking the questions. I think that Gurudev has really been able to bring us some insights into how we can strive for collective consciousness and how we can really think about listening to ourselves and our intuition for doing good in the world. And I think the most important message is that we can make the impossible possible, and it's in young people's hands to do this, because you definitely should be the ones ruling the world. So thank you, and thank you, Gurudev. Jai Gurudev.